His fingers brushed her wrist like one might hold a wing without breaking it. She couldn't retreat. The entire hall bowed before that man, but he looked only at her, as if the rest of the world were gray, and she, the sole point of color. Her breath hitched. The air grew heavy. And then he said, with that voice that dragged stones at the bottom of a river, "You will not flee from me again." Her heart pounded so hard she feared he would hear it. Before we delve into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The rain had arrived in the morning like an unfulfilled promise, thin and cold, licking the courtyard stones with the insistence of something in no hurry. She had woken to the sound of water drumming on the thatched roof, a muffled patter that mingled with the creaking of ancient beams, the wind's stifled sigh through the cracks. Daylight barely pierced the thick mist that hung over the valley, and everything seemed enveloped in a layer of gray. The sky, the trees, the distant mountains. Even the birds were silent. It was as if the world had forgotten color, or as if color had forgotten the world. She rose slowly, her bare feet touching the icy stone floor. The cold crept up her legs like invisible hands, grasping her ankles, pulling her down. She breathed deeply and closed her eyes, letting the damp air fill her lungs, laden with the scent of wet earth and moss, of aged wood and cold ashes in the fireplace. It was the scent of a place that belonged to the past, yet insisted on existing in the present. Like her. The house where she lived wasn't truly hers. Nothing there was, not the ivy-covered stone walls, nor the narrow bed where she slept, nor the worn dress hanging on the iron hook beside the window. Everything belonged to the family who had taken her in when she had no one left, or rather, who had tolerated her, because taking in implied affection, and there was nothing there but cold obligation, pity that turned into resentment with the passing years. She was the orphan, nobody's child, the one who arrived at 7 years old with eyes too large for her thin face, with torn clothes and feet sore from endless walking, the one brought by the storm, they said, like an unwanted gift left at the door. And ever since, she had grown up in the shadows of that house, amidst whispers and sidelong glances, amidst never-ending chores and words that were never kind. She didn't know where she came from. She didn't remember her mother's face, nor her father's voice. She had only fragments, the scent of lavender, the sound of a song, the warmth of a hand holding hers. And then, the void, the cold, the silence that swallows everything and returns nothing. She dressed in silence, her trembling fingers tying the skirt's cord, adjusting the shawl over her shoulders. The fabric was rough against her skin, but she no longer felt it. She was used to it. Pain becomes part of the body when it lasts long enough. It ceases to be pain and becomes just another weight one carries. Like bones. Like blood. She descended the stairs carefully, the wooden steps groaning beneath her feet. The kitchen was still empty, but the fire had already been lit. Someone had risen before her. Probably Martha, the housekeeper, that hard-faced woman with quick hands who never wasted words on her. Martha treated her as if she were a piece of furniture that needed cleaning, but didn't deserve to be noticed. And perhaps that was exactly what she was there. An object of charity. A burden to be justified before God, but one that inspired no love. She fetched the bucket of water and went out to the well. The rain continued to fall, heavier now, cutting through the air like thin blades of ice. She was soaked in seconds. Her dress clung to her body, heavy and cold, and she felt the water trickle down her neck, her back, her arms. But she kept walking, always kept going, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering that she was alone. And solitude had teeth. It bit slowly, but deeply. The well was in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by lichen-covered stones. The water inside was dark as ink, and they said it tasted of iron. She lowered the bucket, hearing the sound of metal scraping against stone, and pulled with force. Her arm muscles burned, but she didn't stop. She pulled until the bucket rose, overflowing, heavy as guilt. She returned inside drenched, her hair plastered to her face, her lips purple with cold. Martha looked her up and down and shook her head. "You look like a drowned rat," she said, without pity. "Dry yourself before you get sick. We don't have time to care for the ill here." She didn't answer. Never did. She had learned early that her words held no value, that her voice was like the wind. It could shout, but no one truly heard it. So she silenced herself. She became a shadow that walked, that worked, that obeyed. And in the quietness, she found a strange way to exist. Not as a person, but as a presence. Something that was there, but didn't bother anyone. Something that could be ignored. She spent the day amidst endless chores. Washing, scrubbing, cooking, sewing. Her fingers grew rough and red. Her nails broke. Her back ached. But she continued. Because stopping was not allowed. Because there, in the house of those who had taken her in, there was no rest for those without a blood name, for those with no right to exist beyond utility. In the afternoon, when the sun tried to break through the clouds and gave up, she was called to the main hall. Her heart tightened. No one called her to the hall unless there was trouble. And trouble in that house always meant her. She entered with her head bowed, her hands clasped in front of her body, her eyes fixed on the worn plank floor. The lady of the house was seated by the fireplace, her embroidery in her lap, and an expression of displeasure on her face. Beside her, her daughter, a young woman with golden hair and clear eyes, beautiful as a painting and cruel as a sharp blade. "You stained my dress," the daughter said, holding up a piece of blue fabric. "Look, here, this oil stain. You are careless, incompetent." She looked at the dress, at the small, almost invisible stain. She knew it wasn't her. She knew this was a trap, but she said nothing. Because denying it was useless. Because there, her word was worth less than silence. "I apologize," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "Apologies don't clean stains," the lady said coldly. "You will pay for a new one, with your wages." She had no wages. Never had. She worked for food and shelter, for a place to sleep, for crumbs of existence, and now they wanted her to pay for something she hadn't ruined. "Yes, ma'am," she said, because there was no other possible answer. The daughter smiled, a small, sharp smile, full of petty pleasure. And she understood. This wasn't about the dress. It was about power, about reminding her every day that she had no value, no voice, that she was less than nothing. She left the hall with a tight chest and a burning throat. She climbed to the attic where she slept, a narrow space under the sloping roof, where she could barely stand upright. She sat on the floor and hugged her knees, burying her face in her arms. She didn't cry. She no longer cried. The tears had dried years ago when she realized that crying changed nothing, that pain moved no one, that she was alone, and always would be. Night fell like a stone, dark, heavy, starless. She stayed there, in the dark, listening to the wind howl through the trees, listening to the rain beat on the roof, listening to the silence of the house where no one cared if she existed or not. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to think of death, not as an escape, but as rest, as the end of a weariness that had no cure. But then, in the middle of the night, something changed. A sound, distant, deep, like hooves striking wet earth, like the creak of carriage wheels, like voices coming from the main gate. She rose and went to the narrow window, peeking through the crack between the boards. Outside, cutting through the darkness, were lit torches, and figures, men on horseback, a black carriage, gleaming even in the rain, with golden crests on its doors. And suddenly, the air changed, as if something powerful had arrived, as if the world had stopped breathing for an instant, waiting. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know who those people were. But something inside her awakened, something ancient, something that whispered, "Your life will never be the same again." And she, for the first time, didn't know whether she should feel fear or hope. The morning brought a pale light that crept through the cracks like something sickly. She woke with an aching body, muscles tense from a restless night, full of dreams she couldn't remember, but which left a bitter taste in her mouth. She descended the stairs carefully, her feet still bare. and found the house in an uproar. Martha bustled back and forth with her hands full of clean towels, her face red with effort. The maids cleaned every corner, every surface, every patch of floor as if their lives depended on it. And the lady of the house was at the center of it all, shouting orders, her hands gesticulating in the air, her face a mask of anxiety disguised as authority. "Everything must be impeccable," she said, her voice echoing through the walls. "He cannot see anything out of place. Nothing." She stopped on the last step, watching everything with wide eyes. No one explained anything. No one ever explained. She was merely expected to understand, to obey, to do what was necessary without questioning. Martha saw her and pointed a finger. "You, go fetch fresh flowers from the garden, the best you can find, and quickly." She nodded and went out the back door, crossing the wet courtyard to the small walled garden beside the house. The rain had stopped during the night, but everything was still soaked, heavy with moisture. The flowers drooped to the ground, their petals laden with water, and she had to kneel in the wet earth to cut them carefully. There were white roses, not yet fully open, and jasmine that exuded a scent too sweet, almost suffocating. She gathered them with trembling fingers, feeling the fragility of the stems, the weight of the water droplets falling onto her hands. And as she worked, she heard fragments of conversation coming from the kitchen, low but urgent voices. "They say he's ruthless." "I heard no one dares cross him." "The whole family trembles when he appears." "But why would he come here? We are nobody." "There must be a reason. He does nothing without purpose." She carried the flowers inside, their petals brushing her face, leaving damp trails on her cheeks. She handed them to Martha, who snatched them from her hands without a thank you and rushed off to arrange them in the porcelain vases that were usually kept stored away, covered in dust. The day passed in mounting tension. The entire house seemed to hold its breath, waiting. And she, in the midst of it all, continued working, cleaning, organizing, preparing things whose purpose she didn't know. But she felt it. She felt it in the air, in the way people spoke, in the heavy silence that fell between words. Something big was about to happen. At midday, a boy came running from the road, his face red with effort. "They're coming!" he shouted. "I saw the carriage. They're less than an hour away." The house erupted in movement. The lady of the house shouted more orders. The maids rushed to change their clothes. The daughter descended the stairs wearing her best dress, her hair styled in elaborate braids, her face painted with a subtle pink on her cheeks. She looked like a doll. Beautiful, perfect, empty, and her. No one told her to change. No one cared about her appearance, because she didn't matter. She wasn't part of it. She was just another piece of furniture that needed to be in the right place at the right time. Martha pushed her into the kitchen. "You stay here," she said, pointing to a dark corner near the pantry, "and don't show yourself unless you're called. Understood?" She nodded, always nodded. And she stayed there, in the corner, her hands clasped, watching the chaos through the ajar door. When the carriage arrived, the world seemed to stop. She heard the sound of hooves striking the courtyard stones, the creak of wheels, the crack of the whip. She heard masculine voices, firm and deep. She heard the front door opening, footsteps echoing in the corridor. And then, through the crack in the door, she saw him, tall, impossible to ignore, dressed in black with a long coat that moved like a living shadow around his body. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, framing a face that seemed sculpted from marble. Strong, angular features, almost cruel in their perfection. But it was his eyes that held her, dark as a moonless night, deep as bottomless wells. Eyes that seemed to see through things, through people, through lies and masks. He entered as if the space belonged to him. He didn't ask permission. He didn't wait to be invited. He simply entered, and the air bowed before him. The lady of the house curtsied so deeply she almost touched the floor with her forehead. "My lord," she said, her voice trembling, "it is an honor to have you in our humble home." He didn't answer immediately. His eyes swept the hall, assessing every detail, every corner, every person present. And when he finally spoke, his voice was grave, controlled, laden with an authority that needed no assertion. "Sit," he said, more an order than an invitation. Everyone obeyed. The lady, her daughter, even Martha stood motionless in the corridor, barely daring to breathe. He walked to the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, and stood there for a moment, watching the flames. The silence was so heavy, she could hear it crushing the air. She could feel the tension rising through the walls, filling every empty space. "I came here for a specific reason," he said, without turning. "There is something in this house that belongs to me, something that was taken from me long ago." The lady paled. "My lord, I don't understand. We have nothing of yours. We are simple folk. We live a modest life. If someone told you otherwise—" "I was not told," he interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade. "I know. I've always known. And now I've come to claim what is mine." He turned, and his eyes swept the hall again. And then, as if something had guided him, he looked at the kitchen door. He looked directly at the crack where she was hidden. And for a second, just 1 second, their gazes met. Her heart stopped. It wasn't possible. He couldn't see her. It was dark there. She was hidden. But those eyes held her like claws, gripped her, prevented her from breathing. And then he looked away, as if nothing had happened. "Bring all members of this house into the hall," he ordered. "Everyone, without exception." The lady rose hastily, her hands trembling. "Yes, my lord, immediately." Martha appeared in the kitchen and pulled her by the arm, dragging her out of the dark corner. "You too," she hissed. "He said everyone." She was led to the hall with shaky legs, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She stood at the back, near the wall, trying to become invisible. But she knew it was useless, because he had already seen her. He already knew she was there. When everyone was gathered, he walked among them slowly, assessing each face, each person. His steps were deliberate, controlled, like those of a predator who knows its prey has nowhere to run. He stopped before the daughter of the house, looked at her for a long moment. She blushed, lowered her eyes, murmured something inaudible, but he didn't seem impressed. He simply moved on. He stopped before the lady. She trembled visibly, her hands clutching the fabric of her skirt. "How many people live here?" he asked. We are 5, my lord. Myself, my daughter, the housekeeper, and 2 maids." "5, he repeated, his voice drawn out. "Are you sure?" The lady hesitated, looked around as if counting mentally. "Yes, my lord, 5. He smiled, a small, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You are lying." The silence that followed was deafening. The lady opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The maids instinctively recoiled. The daughter paled, and then he turned and walked directly to her. She couldn't move, couldn't look away. She stood there paralyzed as he approached, as his shadow enveloped her, as the scent of leather and pine and something darker, deeper, filled her senses. He stopped before her, so close she could see the details of his face. The thin scar that cut his left eyebrow, the exact shade of his eyes, the way his jaw tensed. "You," he said, his voice soft now, almost a whisper. "What is your name?" She opened her mouth, but no voice came out. She tried again, forcing the words through her constricted throat. I don't—" "Your name," he insisted, patient but relentless. "I have none," she finally whispered. "I have no name." Something passed through his eyes. Surprise? Recognition? She couldn't tell, but he extended his hand, and before she could retreat, his fingers touched her chin, lifting her face so she was forced to meet his gaze. "Everyone has a name," he said, "even if they've forgotten it." And then, to the horror of everyone in the room, he spoke loudly, clearly, definitively. "Well, you come with me." The lady took a step forward, her hands raised in protest. "My lord, she is just an orphan, a maid. She has no value. If we have offended you in any way—" "I don't care what you think," he said, without even looking at the lady. His eyes remained fixed on her. "She comes with me. Now." She felt the world spin, felt her legs weaken, felt the air leave her lungs. I don't understand, she murmured. You don't need to, he replied. Just obey. And at that moment, she realized she had no choice. Never had. Because that man, whoever he was, had a power that went beyond the physical, beyond the social. It was something primal, something that twisted fate around him, that bent the will of others with just a look. She nodded, because that was all she could do. And when he extended his hand, she took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against her cold skin, feeling the firmness of his fingers closing around hers. And she knew, with a certainty that burned like fire, that her life had just changed forever. The carriage swayed gently as it traversed the dirt road, the wheels creaking over stones and roots. She sat on the cushioned seat, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the window where the landscape passed like a blur of green and gray. Across from her, he remained motionless, his body relaxed against the backrest, but his eyes never stopped watching her. He didn't speak. He didn't explain. He just looked, and that silence was heavier than any words. She tried to focus on her breathing. In, out. In, out. But the air seemed scarce, as if the carriage had sucked all the oxygen and left only pressure. Her hands trembled. She clasped them tighter, burying her nails into her palms, using the pain to keep herself present. What did he want from her? Why had he taken her? She was nobody. She had nothing of value. She had no family, no name, no wealth. She was less than dust. And yet, that man who made the whole house tremble, had chosen her, pointed at her as if he knew exactly who she was. But that was impossible. No one knew who she was. Not even herself. You are afraid? His voice cut the silence like a knife. She looked up quickly, meeting his gaze. It wasn't a question. It was an affirmation. She began, but her voice failed. She swallowed hard and tried again. Yes. Good, he said. And something that might have been a smile touched his lips. Fear keeps people honest. She didn't know what to say, so she remained silent, her eyes returning to the window, to the dense forest that now surrounded the road, ancient trees with twisted trunks and branches that intertwined like skeletal fingers. Where are we going? She finally asked, her voice so low it almost got lost in the sound of the wheels. Home, he replied. Home, she repeated, confused. But I have no home. Now you do. She looked at him again, trying to understand, but his face was a mask, impossible to read. There was no cruelty there, but no kindness either. Just a cold determination, a purpose that accepted no questioning. Why me? She whispered. Well, why did you bring me? He remained silent for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on her, as if deciding how much to reveal. Because you belong to me, he finally said. The words fell upon her like stones. She recoiled instinctively, her back pressing against the seat. I belong to no one, she said. And for the first time in years, there was something in her voice that wasn't submission. It was protest. It was anger. He arched an eyebrow, and this time, he definitely smiled. She has spirit, he murmured, almost to himself. That is good. I will need it. Need it for what? She asked, her voice rising. What do you want from me? Everything, he replied, simply, and said nothing more. The journey lasted hours. The sun began to descend, painting the sky orange and red, fire colors reflected in the low clouds. And then, through the trees, she saw it. A castle. No, it wasn't quite a castle. It was something between a castle and a fortress. A massive dark stone construction that rose against the sky like a clenched fist. Pointed towers pierced the clouds, and high walls surrounded the main building, covered in black ivy that looked more alive than vegetal. There was something unnatural about that place. Something that made her skin crawl. That made the air colder. Heavier. The carriage passed through the iron gate, and she heard the metallic sound of the hooks closing behind them. Like jaws. Like a trap. When they stopped, he dismounted first and extended his hand to help her. She hesitated, but there was no choice. She took his hand and stepped down, her feet touching smooth, cold stones. The courtyard was immense, surrounded by black stone columns, and in the center was a fountain. But the water that gushed from it was dark, almost black, and made a disturbing sound, like whispers. "Welcome," he said, and there was something in his voice now, something that might have been satisfaction. "Welcome to Shadowbrook Manor." She looked at the building before her, at the tall, narrow windows that looked like empty eyes, at the solid wooden doors carved with symbols she didn't recognize, and she felt, with a certainty that chilled her blood, that this place was alive, that it watched, that it waited. He led her inside, through wide, dark corridors, lit only by torches that burned with a strange, bluish flame. The walls were covered with ancient tapestries showing scenes of battles, coronations, something that looked like rituals, and there were portraits, dozens of them, of people who looked at her with painted eyes, but who seemed to follow her movements. She tried to memorize the way, but it was impossible. The castle was a labyrinth, each corridor leading to another, each door opening to more corridors, more stairs, more shadows. Finally, he stopped before a double door of dark wood. "These will be your chambers," he said, pushing the doors open. The room was enormous, larger than the entire house where she had lived. There was a canopy bed, dark red velvet curtains, a carved wooden wardrobe, a fireplace where a fire already burned. There were thick rugs on the stone floor, and a tall window that overlooked a walled garden where pale flowers grew in the light of the rising moon. "You will stay here," he said. "You will not leave without my permission. You will not speak to anyone without my authorization. You will obey all the rules I set. Understood." She looked at him, at the man who had brought her there, who had torn her from the only life she knew, who now imprisoned her in that strange and frightening place. "Oh, and if I refuse?" she asked, knowing it was foolish, but unable to hold back the words. He approached, and suddenly he was so close she could feel his warmth, could see the golden threads in his dark eyes, could smell his scent, wood and spices and something wild. "You will not refuse," he said, his voice low, dangerous, "because deep down, you know you have nowhere to go. You know that out there, you are nothing. But here you can be something. You can have purpose. You can have meaning." "What kind of meaning?" she whispered, caught between fear and something more dangerous, something that felt like hope. "That," he said, stepping back, "you will discover soon enough." And then he left, closing the doors behind him. She heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. She was trapped. She ran to the door and tried to open it, but it was useless. It was locked. She leaned her forehead against the cold wood and closed her eyes, her heart beating wildly in her chest. What had just happened? Who was that man? And why did she feel that, despite the fear, despite the imprisonment, despite everything? A part of her didn't want to flee. She moved away from the door and walked to the window. Outside, the garden stretched under the moonlight, the flowers swaying in the wind, and beyond the walls, she saw the forest, dark and impenetrable, surrounding the castle like a sea of shadows. She was trapped, but for the first time in her life, she felt that maybe, just maybe, there was something here for her to find, something that had been lost long ago. And as she looked out into the night, she felt her eyes burn, not with tears, but with something stronger, with determination, with a silent anger that had been buried by years of submission. If that man thought she would be just another piece in his game, he was mistaken. She had survived worse things than prisons and mysteries. She had survived loneliness. She had survived abandonment. She had survived being nothing. And if there was one thing she had learned, it was that those who have nothing to lose can be dangerous. She didn't know what would come. She didn't know what he wanted. But she knew one thing. She would not be passive. She would not just be a victim. If she was to be trapped, she would be a prisoner who fought. And as the moon rose in the sky, casting its silvery light over the castle, she made a silent promise to herself. She would uncover the truth. She would discover who that man was. She would discover why he had brought her there, and she would discover, finally, who she herself was. Because some part of her, buried deep, whispered that this was no accident, that there was something more to the story, something that connected her past to that place, to that man, to that destiny. And she was going to unearth every secret, no matter the cost. She turned from the window and walked to the bed. She sat on the edge, her fingers gliding over the soft fabric. It was so different from the straw where she had slept before, so luxurious, so strange. A prisoner in a palace, an orphan in a castle, a nobody in a place that seemed to pulse with ancient power. She lay down but didn't close her eyes. She stared at the ceiling, at the dark wooden beams, at the shadows that danced with the firelight. And she waited, because she knew that whatever came next would change everything. And she would be ready. She awoke to the sound of something tapping, not on the door, but on the window. A light, insistent tap, like fingers against glass. She opened her eyes slowly, her body tense, her heart already racing before she was fully conscious. The dawn light filtered through the heavy curtains, painting the room in shades of gray and pale pink. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. She rose, her bare feet touching the cold rug, and walked to the window. She pulled back the curtain, and a raven, huge, black as spilled ink, was perched on the sill, its head tilted, its round eye fixed on her. And then, to her surprise, it tapped on the glass again, deliberately, as if it wanted her attention. She opened the window, and the raven hopped inside with a hoarse croak. It landed on the edge of the bed, its wings folding against its body, and continued to look at her with that disturbing intensity that made birds seem smarter than they should be. "What do you want?" she murmured, knowing it was absurd to talk to a bird. But the raven tilted its head as if it had understood, and then it opened its beak and let out a sound that made her skin crawl. It wasn't a common croak. It was almost a word, distorted but recognizable. "Beware!" She recoiled, her blood chilling in her veins. It wasn't possible. Birds didn't talk. Not like that. Not with that intention. The raven flapped its wings once and flew to the window, landing on the sill. It looked at her one more time, those bright eyes full of something that seemed like knowledge, and then flew into the garden, disappearing among the trees. She stood still, trembling, trying to understand what had just happened. Was it real? Or was she so shaken that she had started imagining things? A knock on the door made her jump. "Come in," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. The door opened, and a woman entered. She was older, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face marked by wrinkles that seemed to have been sculpted by years of severe expressions. She wore a simple dark dress and carried a tray with food. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice neutral, without warmth, but also without hostility. "I brought your breakfast." She placed the tray on a small table near the fireplace and turned to leave. "Wait," she called. "Please. What is your name?" The woman hesitated, her eyes assessing her for a moment. "Lady Agnes," she finally replied. "I am the housekeeper of this house. If you need anything, you may call me, but do not expect me to answer questions. It is not my place." "I understand," she said, though she understood nothing. And may I know his name? The man who brought me here?" Lady Agnes looked at her with something that might have been pity. "You don't know?" she asked, and when she shook her head, the housekeeper sighed. "Lord Alaric, this is his castle, his land, his domain, and now, girl, you are under his protection, or his curse, depending on how things unfold." Before she could ask anything else, the housekeeper left, closing the door. But this time, she didn't lock it. She heard the footsteps receding down the corridor and stood there, processing the words. Lord Alaric, protection or curse. She walked to the tray and looked at the food. Fresh bread, fruit, cheese, a glass of something that looked like milk. Her mouth watered. How long had it been since she had eaten something like this? In the other house, her meals were always leftovers, what no one else wanted. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying not to think about talking ravens or mysterious lords who imprisoned her in castles. When she finished, she washed her hands in the basin she found on a dresser and decided to explore. The door was unlocked. A test. A trap. Or simply negligence. It didn't matter. She wouldn't stay trapped without trying to understand where she was. She stepped into the corridor and stopped, disoriented. Everything looked the same in the morning light. Stone walls, still-lit torches, ancient tapestries. She chose a direction at random and began to walk. She passed closed doors, empty corridors, stairs that spiraled up and down. The castle was enormous, a labyrinth of stone and shadows, and silent, frighteningly silent. There were no voices, no footsteps, no life, until she turned a corner and almost collided with someone. It was a young woman, perhaps a few years older than her, with red hair tied in a loose braid and green eyes that widened in surprise. "Oh!" the young woman exclaimed, recoiling. "Sorry, I didn't. You must be the new one." "The new one?" she repeated, confused. The young woman nodded, a small smile appearing on her lips. "There are 3 of us now," she said, and there was something in her voice, a tone of relief or perhaps sadness. "I am Alara. I've been here for 2 years. 2 years?" Her heart tightened. You are a prisoner, too." Alara frowned. "Prisoner." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "I suppose you could call it that, though he prefers the term wards. Come, I'll show you something." She hesitated, but curiosity won. She followed Alara through more corridors until they reached a heavy door that the young woman opened with effort. On the other side was an inner garden, an open courtyard surrounded by columns, where sunlight finally entered. And there, sitting on a stone bench, was another young woman. This one was different. Skin dark as ebony, curly hair loose around her face, brown eyes that shone with intelligence. She was reading a book, but looked up as they approached. "That's Serafina," Alara introduced. "She's been here for how long now?" 5 years, Serafina replied, her voice soft but firm. She closed the book and looked at her intently. "And you, what is your name?" She was silent for a moment, the words from years ago echoing in her mind. "I have no name. I don't know," she finally admitted. "I don't remember." Something passed through Serafina's eyes. Understanding? Compassion? He does that," she said calmly. "Brings people who have been forgotten, rejected, erased, people the world decided didn't matter, and brings them here." "Why?" The question came out as a desperate whisper. "Why does he do this?" "That," Alara replied, sitting beside Serafina, "is the question we all ask, and no one has an answer." She sat down too, her legs suddenly weak. She looked at the 2 women, at their faces, that carried stories probably as painful as her own. Did you try to escape?" Serafina and Alara exchanged a look. "Once," Alara admitted. "In my first month here, I managed to reach the forest, but," she shivered. "There are things out there, things that are not natural. I returned before they found me." "And you?" she asked, turning to Serafina. "I didn't try to escape," Serafina replied, and there was a strange calm in her voice. "Because I have nowhere to go. Out there, I would be less than nothing. A slave, property. Here, at least." She hesitated. "Here, I am treated like a person. Strange, isn't it? To be trapped and yet feel freer than I ever was." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach, because she understood completely. In the house where she grew up, she was less than the furniture, less than the animals. She was air. She was nothing. And here, in this strange and frightening castle, with a mysterious lord who imprisoned her, here she had a room. She had food. She had presence. "What does he want from us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "There has to be a reason. No one does this without reason." "If there is a reason," Serafina said, "he hasn't told us. He just keeps us here, observes us. Sometimes he speaks to us. Other times, he goes weeks without appearing. It's like living in a twisted fairy tale. We are the princesses in the tower, but we don't know if we await rescue or condemnation. A bell rang somewhere in the castle, deep and resonant, echoing through the walls. Ilara rose quickly. "It's time," she said, tense. "Time for what?" she asked. "Dinner," Serafina replied, also standing. "Every night we dine with him. It's mandatory, and—" She hesitated. "What, you'd best behave? He can be temperamental." Fear returned, cold and sharp, but along with it came something else. Anger, because she was tired of being afraid, tired of obeying, tired of being tossed from one place to another without a voice, without a choice. "What if I don't want to go?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Ilara looked at her with something that seemed like pity. "Then he will come for you, and you won't want that. Believe me." They led her through the castle to an immense dining hall. The table was long, of polished dark wood, and already set with porcelain plates, crystal goblets, silver cutlery. Enormous chandeliers illuminated the room with a golden light that made shadows dance on the walls. And at the head of the table, in a chair that looked more like a throne, sat he, Lord Alaric. He wore different clothes now, a white shirt open at the collar, dark trousers, but without the heavy coat. He seemed more human like this. But his eyes remained the same, dark, penetrating, impossible to avoid. "Sit," he ordered, and his voice echoed in the empty hall. They obeyed. She was placed to his right, directly under his gaze. She felt her skin burn under that attention, felt every muscle in her body tense. "I hope you are comfortable," he said, and there was an irony in his voice, as if he knew exactly how uncomfortable they were. No one replied. The silence stretched, heavy, oppressive. And then he turned to her, and for the first time, he smiled. A small, unsettling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And you?" he said, his voice low, too intimate. "Are you beginning to understand where you are, what this place is?" She stared at him, refusing to lower her eyes. "No," she replied, and her voice was firm, defiant. "But I will find out." Something passed through his eyes. Surprise? Pleasure? She couldn't tell. "Yes," he murmured, more to himself, "you will." Dinner was served in silence. Elegant dishes, food that smelled of rare spices and fresh herbs, wine that gleamed like liquid ruby in the crystal goblets. But she could barely eat. Each mouthful seemed to weigh in her throat. Each sip of wine burned like fire, because he never stopped looking at her. Not obviously, not continuously, but from time to time his eyes slid to her, assessing, studying, as if trying to read something written on her skin. Serafina and Ilara ate with silent etiquette, their movements controlled, their faces carefully devoid of emotion. Clearly, they had learned to survive those meals, to become invisible even while present. But she couldn't. She couldn't pretend this was normal, that sitting at a table with a man who had kidnapped her was acceptable. She couldn't extinguish the anger that simmered low in her chest, nor the fear that tightened her stomach. "You are not eating," Lord Alaric observed, and his voice cut the silence like a blade. She looked up at him, meeting that dark gaze. "I'm not hungry," she lied. A lie. He tilted his head, a brief smile touching his lips. "You are hungry, probably more so than any of the others here. Years of deprivation do not disappear in one night, but you are angry, and anger steals the appetite." She tightened her fingers around her fork, her jaw clenched. How dared he? How dared he analyze her, dissect her, as if he knew her? "You know nothing about me," she said, her voice low but vibrant with emotion. "I know more than you imagine." He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "I know you grew up without a name, without family, without value in the eyes of those who should have protected you. I know they treated you like a shadow, like something less than human. I know you kept all this inside you, every humiliation, every cruel word, every moment of rejection, and turned it into something hard as stone, into armor." She felt her chest tighten, felt his words pierce defenses that had taken her years to build. How did he know? How could he know? Why? The question came out as a broken whisper. Why did you bring me here? Why did you take me from that place if you only want to torture me in another way? For a moment, something passed across his face, something that might have been pain or regret. But it vanished so quickly, she thought she had imagined it. Torture you, he repeated, his voice strangely soft. Is that what you think I am doing? What else would it be? She retorted, her voice gaining strength. You tore me from the only life I knew, locked me in a castle, forced me to follow rules I don't understand, observed me as if I were an interesting specimen. If that's not torture, I don't know what is. Serafina and Alara exchanged nervous glances, but he merely watched her, impassive. Would you prefer to go back? He finally asked. To that house where they treated you like dirt? Where you slept in a cold attic? Where you ate scraps? Where your entire existence was an inconvenience? She opened her mouth, but couldn't answer, because, however much she hated to admit it, he was right. She didn't want to go back. Not to that place. Not to that life. Timely thought, he said, reading her hesitation. But make no mistake. I did not bring you here out of kindness. I am not your savior. I am... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I am someone who pays old debts. And you, whether you want to or not, are part of that debt. I don't understand. You will understand. He stood up, and the movement was so sudden that she recoiled instinctively. But not tonight. Tonight, you will rest. Tomorrow, your training begins. Training? She repeated, confused. Training for what? He stopped behind her chair, so close she could feel his warmth, could hear his breathing. To be what you truly are, he murmured, and then left the hall, leaving the three women in silence. Alara let out a long sigh. Well, she said, trying to ease the tension. At least you survived the first dinner. Some of us fainted. Serafina looked at her with an unreadable expression. You are different, she said calmly, from the others who came before. You question, you defy. That can be dangerous, or it can be exactly what he was waiting for. Others? Her heart quickened. How many others were there? A heavy silence fell over the table. Alara looked at her hands, avoiding her gaze. And Serafina merely shook her head. Do not ask about what you do not wish to know the answer to, she said, and there was a warning in her voice. But she wanted to know, needed to know, because that castle held secrets. And somehow, she felt her destiny was intertwined with them. That night, lying in her luxurious bed, she couldn't sleep. Thoughts whirled in her mind like leaves in a vortex. Lord Alaric, the other women, the talking raven, the training that would begin tomorrow. Everything was a puzzle with not enough pieces to form a complete picture. She got up and went to the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. And that's when she saw him. Lord Alaric was in the garden, standing near the dark fountain. He wore only a shirt and trousers, his hair loose, and looked at the night sky as if searching for something. There was a loneliness in his posture, a sadness she didn't expect to see. He had always seemed so imposing, so controlled, so untouchable. But there, in that stolen moment, he seemed just a man carrying an invisible weight. And then, as if he had felt her gaze, he turned his head and looked directly at her window. Their eyes met across the distance, and she felt that same electric shock she had felt in the carriage, that inexplicable connection that made her heart race and her skin tingle. He didn't look away. Neither did she. They stayed like that for long seconds, caught in a moment suspended in time. And then, slowly, he inclined his head. A small gesture. Acknowledgement. And he turned, disappearing into the shadows of the garden. She recoiled from the window, her heart pounding too fast. Her breath quickened. What was that? That intensity between them. It wasn't normal. It wasn't natural. She returned to bed and curled up in the sheets, but sleep didn't come. And when she finally began to drift off, It was with his image etched behind her eyelids, his dark eyes, his solitary expression, and that strange, almost tender gesture of tilting his head. The next morning, Lady Agnes came to fetch her early. "Wear this," the housekeeper said, handing her a set of clothes. It wasn't a dress. It was a tunic and trousers of sturdy fabric, dark as night. "Where are we going?" she asked, but Agnes was already leaving. "He's waiting in the training yard. Don't keep him waiting." She dressed quickly, surprised at how comfortable the clothes were, allowing free movement. She followed Agnes through corridors she didn't yet know until they reached a door that led to an outdoor courtyard. And there he was. Lord Alaric stood in the center of the courtyard, shirtless, wearing only dark trousers and boots. His torso was a canvas of defined muscles and scars, some thin as ink lines, others deeper, telling stories of battles and pain. He held a sword, moving it in fluid arcs, each movement precise, controlled, deadly. He stopped when he saw her, the sword lowering until it touched the stone ground. "You came," he said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. "I had no choice," she retorted. "There is always a choice." He watched her for a moment. "But choices have consequences, and you, I suspect, are tired of living with the consequences of others. Choices. It's time to make your own." He gestured to a weapon rack in the corner of the courtyard. "Take a sword." She looked at him, incredulous. "What?" "A sword." His voice was patient, but firm. "I will teach you to fight." "Why?" The question came out before she could stop it. Why would a nameless orphan need to know how to fight? He walked to her, and again he was so close she had to lift her chin to meet his gaze. "Because," he said, his voice low, almost intimate, "the world is cruel to those who cannot defend themselves, and you, more than anyone, deserve to learn to fight back." There was something in his eyes at that moment, something that seemed almost protective. And she found herself believing him, even when everything in her mind screamed not to trust, not to lower her guard. She walked to the rack and chose a sword. It was heavier than she expected, the hilt cold against her palm. She returned to the center of the courtyard, holding the weapon awkwardly. He watched her and then approached, adjusting her posture with firm but careful hands. "Thus," he instructed, positioning her feet, adjusting her shoulders. "Strength does not come from the arms. It comes from the core, from balance, from determination. The sword is merely an extension of your will." She tried to focus on his words, but all she could feel was his proximity, the warmth of his hands, the sound of his voice so close to her ear. It was unsettling. It was dangerous. "Now," he said, stepping back a few paces, "attack me." "What?" "You heard me. Attack me." She hesitated, but then the anger returned. The anger of days, years of powerlessness, of being pushed aside, ignored, humiliated. She gripped the sword and lunged at him. He dodged with ease, almost effortlessly, and she felt frustration burn. "Again," he ordered. She attacked again, and again, and again. And each time he dodged, blocked, danced around her movements as if it were a game. "You are fighting with anger," he said finally. "Anger makes you predictable. Think, observe, anticipate." She stopped, breathless, her body already aching. "How do you expect me to learn in minutes what took you years to master?" Something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "I don't expect it, but I expect you to try. I expect you not to give up. Because that's what you do, isn't it? You survive, you resist, no matter how difficult it gets." His words echoed in her chest. He was right. She had always resisted, always survived, and she wasn't going to stop now. She raised the sword again, and this time she observed. She observed his posture, the way he distributed his weight, the way his eyes telegraphed his movements a fraction of a second before he executed them. And when she attacked again, she managed to surprise him, only for a second. Just enough for her blade to graze his arm, leaving a thin line of blood. He looked at the wound and then at her. And then, for the first time, he truly smiled, a smile that lit up his entire face, that made him look years younger. "Good," he said, and there was genuine pride in his voice. Very good. The weeks that followed became a rhythm, a strange, pulsating rhythm that she never imagined living. She would wake with the dawn, put on the training clothes Lady Agnes left in her room, and descend to the courtyard where Lord Alaric awaited her. And there, under the rising sun or the cold rain, she learned. She learned to hold the sword, to move her body, to anticipate, to attack, to defend herself. Her muscles ached constantly. Her hands grew calloused. Her skin acquired small cuts and bruises that told the story of each lesson. But something was changing within her. Something fundamental. She was becoming stronger, not just physically, but in ways she couldn't name. As if each sword movement also cut the invisible chains that bound her to the past. And Lord Alaric, he was a demanding teacher, but never cruel. He corrected firmly, but also acknowledged progress. And there were moments, brief, fleeting, when she caught him looking at her with something that seemed almost admiration, or perhaps it was melancholy. It was hard to tell. He was a surface of deep waters, impossible to read completely. In the afternoons, she had the freedom to explore the castle. Serafina became her unofficial guide, showing her the inner gardens, the immense library full of books in languages she couldn't read, the empty halls where the echoes of her footsteps were the only company. "Why is it so empty?" she asked one day, as they walked down a corridor where ancient portraits watched them with painted eyes. A castle this size should have servants, guards, life. Serafina hesitated, her fingers tracing the spine of a book she carried. "It did," she finally said. "Before, but Lord Alaric dismissed most, keeps only the essentials. Lady Agnes, a few guards who patrol the outer walls, a few servants we never see. He prefers solitude, or perhaps it's secrecy." "Secrecy about what?" "About us." Serafina looked at her with those penetrating eyes. "Don't you see? We are his secret. No one but him knows we are here, and there's a reason for that." A shiver ran down her spine. What reason? But Serafina merely shook her head. Some questions have answers that transform those who hear them. "Are you sure you want to know?" She didn't answer, because she wasn't sure. Part of her wanted to remain in ignorance, in the safe rhythm of morning training and quiet afternoons. But another part, the part that had always survived by asking questions, observing, understanding, that part couldn't stop. One evening, during dinner, Lord Alaric broke his usual pattern of observant silence. "You are progressing well," he said, and his voice filled the dining hall. "Faster than I expected?" She looked up from her plate, surprised by the direct compliment. "I have a good teacher," she replied, and it wasn't entirely a lie. He tilted his head, accepting the acknowledgement. "But physical strength is not enough. I need you to understand something deeper. Something about the nature of things." He paused. "Tomorrow, you will come with me to a different place, a place where the true lessons begin." Her heart quickened. "What place?" "You will see." And he said nothing more. Dinner ended in silence, but she felt the weight of something shifting, of a door about to open. The next morning, he led her into the forest. Not through the main door, but through a side passage she didn't even know existed. They walked along narrow, moss-covered trails, under trees so ancient their trunks were thick as houses. Sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, and everything had a dreamlike quality, as if they had entered a different world. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice sounding strange in the quietness of the forest. "To a sacred place," he replied. "A place that belongs to something older than this castle, older than me, a place of truth." They arrived at a clearing where in the center was a circle of stones. They were not ordinary stones. They were black as obsidian, polished until they gleamed, and covered with carved symbols that seemed to pulse with their own light. "What is this?" she whispered, feeling the power of the place vibrate through her bones. "It is a portal," Lord Alaric replied, stopping at the edge of the circle. "Not in the physical sense, but a portal to truth, to memory, to that which has been forgotten." He turned to her, and there was something different in his eyes. something vulnerable. I will show you something, something that explains why I brought you here, why you are connected to this place. To me, to a past you don't remember, but that lives in your blood. My blood? Her heart raced. What do you mean? He extended his hand. Enter the circle, and you will see. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed danger. But another part of her, the part that had always known there was something more, something hidden in her story, that part pushed her forward. She took his hand and stepped into the circle. The world exploded in light. Not an ordinary light, but something alive, pulsating, that entered through her eyes, through her skin, through every pore. And then the images came, not as memories, but as living again, as being there. She saw a castle, this castle, but different, alive, full of people, of voices, of music. She saw a man who looked like Lord Alaric, but younger, smiling as he danced with a woman. And the woman had her face. Not exactly, but close enough to be unsettling. The same eyes, the same face shape, the same skin tone. She saw joy. She saw love. She saw promises whispered under stars. And then she saw fire. She saw betrayal. She saw the woman being dragged, chained, accused of witchcraft. She saw the man, saw Lord Alaric screaming, fighting, but being restrained. She saw the woman being taken away. And she saw her eyes full of tears, but also of a silent promise. The vision changed. Years passed like falling leaves. She saw Lord Alaric alone in the castle, waiting, searching, losing hope but never giving up. She saw him bring other women, forgotten, rejected women, seeking something in them, seeking a sign, a spark, seeking her. And then she saw the last image, a child being left in the rain at a door, with only a medallion around her neck. A medallion with the same symbol that was carved into the stones around her now. The light dissipated. She fell to her knees, gasping, tears streaming down her face without her realizing when they began. Lord Alaric was beside her, also on his knees, his hands holding her shoulders. "Now you understand," he said, his voice hoarse. "You are not just a nameless orphan. You are her descendant, of the one who was taken from me, who was judged and condemned for loving someone the world thought she shouldn't love. Your blood carries her memory, her power, her promise. But I don't understand," she sobbed. "If she died, if she was condemned, how—" "She didn't die." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "She escaped, fled, and lived long enough to have a daughter. And that daughter had another. And so for generations. Until finally, I found you." She looked at him through her tears, seeing him truly for the first time. Seeing the pain, the loneliness, the obsession of decades seeking something. Someone he had lost. "You don't love me?" she whispered. "You love her ghost." Something broke on his face. For a moment, he looked as lost as she felt. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I don't know anymore. I searched for so long. I lived for so long just to find a piece of her. But you—" He touched her face, his fingers trembling. "You are not just her ghost. You are something more. Something of your own. Something that I—" He stopped, unable to continue. She stood up, her legs shaky, and recoiled. "I need to think," she said. "I need to be alone." He nodded, dropping to his heels, and she ran out of the circle, through the forest, back to the castle, ran to her room and locked the door, sliding to the floor with her back against the wood. Everything made sense now. And nothing made sense. She was nobody. She was somebody. She was the echo of a story of love and tragedy that had spanned generations. She was the ultimate goal of an obsessive search. It was terrifying, but also, it was liberating. Because for the first time in her life, She had a story. She had a past. She had a reason to exist that went beyond mere survival, and that changed everything. She stayed in her room for 3 days. Lady Agnes left food at the door, but she barely touched it. Serafina and Ilara tried to visit her, but she didn't open. She needed silence. She needed to process what she had seen, what she now knew. Her ancestor had been loved by Lord Alaric, had been torn from him by accusations of witchcraft, had escaped, had survived, and had begotten a lineage that would eventually lead to her. A nameless orphan, discarded by the world, found by the only man who had never given up searching. But what did that mean for her? Was she just a substitute? A pale echo of someone he had truly loved? Or was there something more, something real between them, regardless of the history that preceded them? On the 3rd night, when the moon was high and the castle slept, she heard a soft knock on the door. Not Lady Agnes's firm knock or the hesitant tap of the other women. It was different, more deliberate, more familiar. "I know you're awake," his voice said through the wood. "I can feel it." She remained motionless, her heart pounding. "Please," Lord Alaric continued, and there was something in his voice she had never heard before. Vulnerability, supplication. "I just need to speak with you, just for a moment." She slowly rose, walked to the door, and unlocked it. But she didn't open it. She just stepped back a few paces, waiting. He entered slowly, closing the door behind him. He wore only an open shirt and trousers, his feet bare, his hair disheveled. He looked human, vulnerable, nothing like the powerful lord who commanded everything around him. "You must hate me," he said, stopping a few steps away. "I don't know what I feel," she replied honestly. "Anger, confusion, fear, but hate. I'm not sure." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "I never should have shown you that. Not in that way, not without preparing you first. But He stopped, searching for words. "I waited so long, searched for so long, and when I finally found you, it was as if the world made sense again after centuries of chaos." "Centuries?" She looked at him, truly looked, seeing the subtle lines around his eyes, the deep sadness that inhabited his gaze. "How old are you?" He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "More than I can count, more than I should be. I made a pact long ago, to live until I found her again, to have a chance to right what was destroyed. But she is gone," she said softly, "and I am not her." "I know." He took a step forward. "Believe me, I know. At first, yes, I searched for her, for some trace, some continuation. But you—" His eyes met hers. "You are different, stronger, braver, more real." She was gentle, sweet, submissive. You fight, you question, you don't simply accept, and that fascinates me in ways I didn't expect." His words penetrated her defenses like gentle blades. She wanted to resist, wanted to keep her distance, but something in her responded to that gaze, to that raw honesty. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Truly, not old stories or broken promises. What do you want now?" He was silent for a long moment, and then, slowly, he knelt before her, a gesture that shocked her to her core. Lord Alaric, the man who made kingdoms tremble, kneeling at the feet of a nameless orphan. "I want you to choose," he said, his voice low but firm. "Choose to stay or to leave. Choose to give me a chance or to condemn me to what I deserve. Choose to be more than an echo of the past. Choose to be yourself. And whatever your choice, I will respect it." She looked at him, at that impossible man, powerful and broken at the same time, and she realized something fundamental. He was giving her what no one had ever given her: choice, power, agency over her own destiny. "If I choose to stay," she said slowly, "it will not be as a prisoner. It will not be as a substitute. It will be as an equal." He looked up at her, and there was something burning in that gaze. Yes. And if I choose to leave? He hesitated only a fraction of a second. Then I will let you go, with enough resources to start a life wherever you wish, without pursuit, without conditions. She believed him. For some inexplicable reason, she believed him, and that trust, fragile, new, changed something within her. I don't want to leave, she whispered, and saw relief flood his face. But I also don't know if I can stay. Not yet. Not until I understand what we are, what this is between us. Then stay for as long as you need, he said, rising slowly. Stay and discover. No pressure, no expectations, just stay. She nodded, and he turned to leave. But as he reached the door, she called him, Alaric. He stopped, surprised. It was the first time she'd used his name. He turned. Thank you, she said, for giving me a choice. Something shone in his eyes, emotion so deep it almost hurt to see. It's the least you deserve, he replied, and left. She stood there, in the dark, feeling something new grow inside her. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was possibility. It was the seed of something that could become real. In the days that followed, things subtly changed. The training continued. But now there were conversations. He spoke of his life, of the centuries he had lived, of the wars he had seen, of the loneliness that had almost consumed him. And she spoke too, of the years in the house where she had been discarded, of the dreams she had never dared to have, of the anger she had carried for so long. And slowly, layer by layer, they came to know each other, not as lord and prisoner, not as obsession and object, but as two wounded souls trying to understand if they could heal together. One afternoon, as they rested after training, he took something from his pocket. I found this in the archives, he said, holding out an old medallion, the same medallion she had seen in the vision. It belonged to her, and now it belongs to you. She took the medallion, feeling its weight, the history it carried. She opened it, and inside were two tiny portraits. One of him, young and smiling. One of her, not her, but the woman who had been her ancestor. You can keep it, she said, returning it. It's not mine. It's part of your past. No. He closed her fingers around the medallion. The past is past. This now belongs to you as a remembrance not of who she was, but of who you are, the last of a lineage that survived against all odds. She looked at the medallion, at that small piece of history, and felt tears burn her eyes. I have a name, she whispered suddenly. He looked at her, surprised. I remember now, my mother, before she left me, she whispered, I was very small, but now I remember. She said, Aurora. Like the dawn. Aurora. He tested the name, and a true smile touched his lips. It's perfect, because you are exactly that, a new dawn after a long, long night. And for the first time since she had arrived at that castle, she smiled back. A real smile that came from within, that carried no weight or fear, just hope. Perhaps there was no happy ending waiting. Perhaps this was too complex, too laden with history and pain. But there was something. There was possibility. And for now, that was enough. That night, during dinner, Serafina noticed the change. You are different, she observed, lighter. Aurora, because now she had a name, she had an identity, nodded. I'm starting to understand, she said, to understand who I am, to understand what this place means, and to understand that maybe I can write my own story, not just be part of someone else's story. Ilara smiled. That's what it was always about, wasn't it? Finding yourself when the whole world told you you were nothing. Yes. Aurora looked at Lord Alaric at the head of the table. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, respect, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of something deeper. She didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't know if what was growing between them would be love or just two solitudes finding comfort in each other. But she knew one thing. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. She was not nothing. She was Aurora, and that, in itself, was revolutionary. Weeks turned into months, and the castle that had once seemed a prison began to feel almost a home. Aurora knew every corridor now, every secret garden, every corner where the light entered differently. She knew the times Lady Agnes made her rounds. She knew when the ravens came to the garden to eat the crumbs she left. She understood the silent rhythm of that strange and beautiful place. And she knew Alaric, not completely. He was still a mystery in many layers, but enough to see beyond the mask of power. She saw the tired man carrying centuries of loneliness. She saw the heart he protected so fiercely because it had been broken once irreparably. The training continued, but now it was different. There were laughs sometimes when she managed to surprise him. There were deep conversations when they rested under the shade of the trees. There was connection, real and growing. One afternoon, as they practiced in the courtyard, he suddenly stopped, his sword lowering. "You have learned all I can teach," he said, and there was pride in his voice. "Now you fight like a warrior, like someone who knows her worth." Aurora smiled, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I had a good master." He approached, and his presence still made her heart race, but no longer from fear. It was something different now, something that warmed instead of chilled. "Aurora," he said, and the way he pronounced her name always made something within her stir. "There is something I need to ask you." She looked at him, curious about the serious tone of his voice. "What?" "A festivity will take place in a week. Nobles from all over the realm will come to my castle. It is mandatory that I attend, that I organize, and He hesitated, vulnerability crossing his face. "I would like you to be by my side, not hidden, not as a prisoner or a secret, but as yourself, as Aurora, the woman who chose to stay." Her heart pounded. It was a huge request. It meant exposure, judgment, risks she could barely calculate, but it also meant he saw her, that he recognized her as an equal. "Others will ask who I am," she said slowly. "They will want to know my lineage, my family, my place in the world. And you will tell the truth." His eyes burned with intensity. "That you are Aurora, that your past does not define your worth, that you are here by your own choice. And if they don't accept it, then they can leave my castle." His voice was steel. "I don't care about their opinions. I only care about yours. Do you accept?" She took a deep breath. It was a leap in the dark. But when wasn't it? Her whole life had been one leap after another, trying to survive. Perhaps it was time to stop merely surviving and start truly living. "Yes," she replied. "I accept." The smile he gave would have lit up the entire world. And for a moment, just a brief, stolen moment, he held her face in his hands and rested his forehead against hers. An intimate, yet chaste gesture. A gesture that said more than words could. "Thank you," he whispered. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Lady Agnes appeared with seamstresses, and Aurora was measured for dresses she never imagined wearing. Silks and velvets, intricate embroideries, deep colors like wine and midnight blue. She tried to protest. It was too much, too luxurious, but the housekeeper merely shook her head. "The Lord ordered the best," she said, and there was something in her gaze that might have been approval. "And the best is what you will have." Serafina and Ilara helped her choose among the designs, laughing and making suggestions. It was strange, almost surreal, to have this moment of normal femininity after all she had lived through, but it was also good. She felt part of something, part of a small but real community. "Are you nervous?" Ilara asked as she helped her try on one of the dresses. "Terrified," Aurora admitted. "I've never been to a social event. I don't know how to act, what to say, how to—" "You act like yourself," Serafina interrupted, adjusting the dress's collar. It's all he asked, all any true person should ask. The night of the festivity arrived too quickly. Aurora was in her room, looking at herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman she saw. The dress was dark blue velvet, almost black, with silver embroidery that looked like stars. Her hair was loose in soft curls around her face. And someone, she suspected it was Serafina, had left the old medallion visible around her neck. She looked real, not a shadow, not an invisible one, but a person with presence, with substance. A knock on the door made her turn. "Come in," she said, and her voice trembled only slightly. Alaric entered, and she heard her breath catch. He too was formally dressed, black clothes with golden details, hair tied back, beard trimmed, and he looked magnificent, like the lord he truly was, powerful and lethal and beautiful in ways that should be forbidden. "You are—" He stopped, searching for words. "You are stunning." She felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "It's just expensive clothes." "No." He approached, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's not the clothes. It's you. It always was you. Only now the world will be able to see what I have always seen." He extended his arm, and she took it, feeling his solidity, his strength. And together, they descended the stairs to the great hall where the festivity was already in full swing. The hall was transformed. Candles in golden candelabras, flowers in enormous arrangements, soft music from string instruments, and people, dozens of them, nobles in luxurious clothes, jewels gleaming, faces painted with political smiles and calculating eyes. When Aurora and Alaric entered together, the hall fell silent. All eyes turned to them, or more specifically, to her. She could feel the weight of those gazes, the judgment, the malicious curiosity. Alaric led her to the center of the hall and turned to face his guests. "This," he said, his voice echoing with unquestionable authority, "is Aurora. She is under my protection and has my deepest respect. I expect everyone to treat her with the courtesy she deserves." A murmur ran through the crowd. She saw expressions of surprise, curiosity, ill-disguised disdain, but no one dared to openly question, not when Lord Alaric spoke that way. The night progressed in a strange haze. Aurora was introduced to dukes and counts, to ladies and lords, and each conversation was a careful dance of unspoken words. She could feel the questions they wanted to ask, but dared not. Who was she? Where did she come from? What did she mean to Lord Alaric? But there was also something more. Some, not many, but some, looked at her with something that seemed like respect, as if they saw in her something they recognized. Strength, perhaps, or survival. She was talking to an older merchant, a kind man who seemed genuinely interested in her story, when she felt a presence behind her. She turned and froze. It was a woman, beautiful, in an almost supernatural way, with hair black as night and eyes green as venom. She wore a blood-red dress and smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "So you are the new one," the woman said, her voice silky and dangerous. "Our dear lord's new distraction." Aurora felt Alaric tense beside her, where he was talking to another noble, but she didn't need him to defend her. Not this time. "And you are?" Aurora asked, keeping her voice calm. "Lady Morgana," the woman replied. "An old friend of Lord Alaric. Very old, in fact." The way she said "old friend" made it clear it meant something more. Aurora felt a sting of something unpleasant. Not jealousy, she told herself, but something close. Pierce her chest. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Aurora said politely, though it was anything but true. "I doubt it," Morgana laughed, a sound like broken bells. "But don't worry, dear. You're not the first, and I suspect you won't be the last. Alaric collects lost women like some collect works of art. It's almost pathetic." The words were designed to hurt, and they did. But Aurora had survived worse things than venomous words. She looked Morgana directly in the eyes and smiled. "Perhaps, but the difference is that I chose to be here. I have the impression you weren't so lucky, hence the bitterness." Morgana paled, and something dangerous gleamed in her eyes, but before she could reply, Alaric was between them. his presence like a wall of ice. "Morgana," he said, his voice cutting, "you were not invited. How did you get in?" "Oh, Alaric," she laughed, but there was tension in her now. "Always so hostile. I only came to see your new acquisition, to warn the poor girl about whom she's getting involved with. Leave. It wasn't a request, it was an order. Now—" For a moment, Morgana seemed to consider defying him, but then she saw something in his face. Something even Aurora felt, and recoiled. "As you wish." She turned, but not before casting one last venomous glance at Aurora. "Be careful, girl. Men like him destroy everything they touch, even when they don't mean to." And then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd. Alaric turned to Aurora, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" "I am," she replied, and it was true. Morgana's words had hurt, but they hadn't broken her. She was stronger than that now. "Who was she?" "No one important," he said, but his eyes said otherwise. "Someone from the past, someone who never learned to let go." Aurora nodded, accepting the non-answer, because she understood. Everyone had pasts, everyone carried ghosts. What mattered was the present, and in the present she was here, standing beside him, surviving yet another trial. The rest of the night passed without incident, and when it finally ended, when the last guests left, Aurora found herself in the garden, breathing fresh air, letting the night's mask fall. Alaric found her there, standing under the moon. "You were incredible," he said, stopping beside her. "Better than I expected, better than I could have been." "I learned from the best," she replied, echoing his words from weeks ago. He laughed, a genuine and rare sound, and then, slowly, he took her hand. "Aurora," he said, and there was something different in his voice now, something vulnerable and brave at the same time. "I don't know how to name what I feel for you. I don't know if it's an echo of the past or something completely new, but I know that when you are not near, the world feels colder, and when you are, I remember what it's like to be alive." Her heart pounded so hard, it felt like it would break her ribs. She looked at him, at that impossible man who had found her, who had challenged her, who had respected her in ways no one ever had. "I don't know what this is either," she admitted, "but I know I don't want it to end. Not yet." He smiled, and it was like the sun rising after an eternal night. "Then it won't end," he promised, and he sealed that promise with a simple but powerful gesture. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her calloused, scarred fingers from so much training. And Aurora, for the first time in her entire life, felt that maybe, just maybe, she could have something she had always thought impossible. Happiness. But happiness, Aurora would soon learn, was a fragile thing, fragile like ancient glass. And sometimes the past had sharper teeth than the present. 3 days after the festivity, she awoke to a strange sound. Not the raven tapping at the window, but something more distant, more ominous, like horses galloping, many of them, and voices shouting. She rose quickly and ran through the corridors. She found Alaric already in the main hall, dressed for battle, sword in hand. His face was a mask of controlled fury. "What's happening?" she asked, breathless. "Morgana," he replied, without taking his eyes off the door. "She brought the council. Accusations have been made." "What accusations?" Before he could answer, the doors burst open with a crash. Morgana entered, followed by armored men and elaborate cloaks. Her smile was victorious, cruel. "Lord Alaric," she said, her voice echoing, "you are summoned before the council to answer for your transgressions." "What transgressions?" His voice was ice-melting metal. "I owe nothing to you or the council." "Ah, but you do." Morgana pointed at Aurora. "This woman you harbor, she is a descendant of one condemned for witchcraft. Her blood is tainted, and you, by protecting her, by elevating her, violate the ancient decrees." Aurora felt the world tremble. This was a trap. Morgana had used the festivity to identify her, to discover who she was, and now used it against them both. "The ancient decrees have no power over me," Alaric said, stepping forward. I precede them, I helped write them, and I can disregard them. You can, Morgana agreed, circling like a predator. But can you protect her from what comes next? From judgment? From condemnation? From the same pyre that consumed her ancestor? Aurora felt fear explode in her chest. Not for herself, she had faced worse things than death, but for Alaric, because she saw in his face what Morgana wanted to see. Pain, memory, revived trauma. No, Aurora said, taking a step forward. I will not allow you to do this again. All eyes turned to her. Morgana smiled, but Alaric looked at her with something close to panic. Aurora, no. She wants to judge me, Aurora continued, ignoring him, her voice gaining strength. She wants to condemn me for blood I didn't choose, for ancestors I didn't know. Then let her do it, but not through manipulation, not through fear. If I am to be judged, let it be in public, with witnesses, with truth being told. Morgana frowned, her certainty wavering for a moment. You don't know what you're asking for. I know exactly. Aurora walked until she was face to face with Morgana. I know you don't care about ancient decrees or justice. You want to destroy him by destroying me. But here's the thing. I've survived worse things than you. I've survived being nobody. And now that I know who I am, you cannot break me. There was a moment of absolute silence, and then, to everyone's surprise, one of the councilmen laughed, a low but genuine sound. She has courage, he said, an old man with a white beard and sharp eyes, more than most we've seen. Perhaps we should hear what she has to say. Morgana spun, furious. You were summoned to apply justice, not to— We were summoned by you, the old man interrupted, under premises that now seem questionable to me. If the girl wants to speak, I will listen to her. And so, right there, in the castle hall, a trial took place. But not like the ancient trials. Not with pyres and screams, but with words. Aurora told her story. All of it. The nameless childhood, the years of humiliation, the discovery of who she was. She spoke of her ancestor, of the love that had been condemned, of the injustice of judging people for whom they loved or where they came from, and she spoke of choice, of how she had chosen to stay, chosen to fight, chosen to be more than circumstances had made her. When she finished, there were tears in the eyes of some present, and even Morgana seemed less certain. The old councilman stood up. I have seen many things in my years, he said, many judgments, many condemnations, but I have never seen someone defend their existence with such humanity. The ancient decrees were written in times of fear. Perhaps it is time to allow new times to bring new laws. He looked at Morgana. Your accusation is denied. This woman has committed no crime. And if you bring frivolous accusations again, it will be you who faces consequences. Morgana paled with fury, but she could do nothing. The council had spoken. She cast a final look of hatred at Aurora and Alaric and left, her soldiers following her. When the hall emptied, Aurora felt her legs give way. Alaric caught her before she fell, holding her against his chest. You are impossible, he murmured, but there was admiration in his voice. Brave and impossible. I learned from you, she said, echoing his words once more. He laughed, a broken sound of relief, and hugged her tightly. I thought I was going to lose you, he confessed. Again, I thought history was going to repeat itself, but it didn't repeat. She pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. Because this time, I could fight. This time, I had a voice. And this time, you were by my side. Not just watching. He touched her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Aurora, he said, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. I love you, not as an echo of anyone, not as a memory, but as you, exactly as you are. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had felt, of everything that had grown between them. I love you too, she whispered. And when he kissed her, it was different from anything she had imagined. It wasn't urgent or desperate. It was soft, reverent, like sealing a promise they both knew they would keep. The months that followed were transformative. Aurora was no longer a secret. She walked through the castle corridors as if she belonged. Because she did. She continued training. But now she also learned other things. To read the ancient books in the library, to understand politics and strategy, to use her voice not only in self-defense, but in defense of others. And Alaric changed too. The loneliness that had surrounded him for centuries began to dissipate. He smiled more, laughed more, lived more. Serafina and Ilara remained, but no longer as prisoners or secrets. As family, as sisters Aurora had never had. And together, the three women the world had tried to erase created something new. A refuge. A place where others like them could come and find not only shelter, but purpose. The castle that had been a symbol of loneliness became a symbol of hope. And Aurora, the nameless orphan, became Aurora, the woman who had defied destiny and won. Not because she was special, not because she was chosen, but because she refused to be nothing, because she fought for her right to exist, and because she found, in the most unlikely place, someone who saw her exactly as she was and loved her for it. Years later, on a night when the moon shone over the garden, Aurora stood near the dark fountain. Alaric found her there, as he always did. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How strange life is," she replied. "How we start in places of darkness and somehow find light." "Not somehow." He turned her to face him. "You created the light. In you, in me, in this place. You transformed everything." She smiled. That smile that now came easily, naturally. "We transformed everything," she corrected, "together." "Together," he agreed. And as they stood there under the stars, Aurora thought of all the versions of herself she had lived. The abandoned child, the nameless orphan, the prisoner, the fighter, and finally, this Aurora, whole, loved, free. The story didn't end there. She knew. Stories never truly end. They merely change form, continue in new directions. But this chapter of finding herself, of finding love, of finding purpose, this one was complete. And it was more than she had ever dared to dream, because sometimes the most beautiful endings are not those where everything is perfect. They are those where imperfect people find ways to be perfect together, where the wounds of the past do not disappear, but also do not define the future, where there is hope and choice and love. And Aurora had all of that. Finally, if this story found a mirror in your soul, leave your comment and share. Sometimes, what hurts us most is what makes us most human.